Hey everybody, it's Alana Yvonne with Truly Great Life, and I am thrilled to be here with another episode of Raw DMC. In case this is your first one, Raw DMC stands for Raw, Real, Deep, Meaningful Conversations that I have with a guest. And the guest today is Nadav Weil. Nadav is a young professional, and he brings a unique perspective and philosophy to living his truly great life, and we cover a lot in this conversation. So let's jump in. Thanks for joining. Hi, Nadav.
Hi, Lana.
I'm so excited that you're here. So, for everyone joining us, if this is your first time watching a Raw DMC or your third, because this is number three, actually, no, number four. I haven't published number three. These are conversations with amazing people who feel they have an important message or story that they want to share on a larger scale with a broader audience. And the thing that really is important to me in having these conversations is that they're a raw DMC. What does that mean? Real, raw, authentic, out there, true, deep, meaningful conversations. Because I feel like so many of us that there's so much BS and shellacked and presented and artificial. And there is a lot of authentic out there. And these conversations are meant for you, the dear listener, to kind of think of what's going on in your life, especially any challenges, changes, the unexpected, and to get strength and inspiration, hope and encouragement, motivation from these people who also have gone through or are coping with challenges, the unexpected changes, etc., etc. So, with that, I want to introduce, I took notes, Nadav. Nadav Weil is a young Jewish professional with Tourette syndrome. He is a writer, world traveler, deep thinker, insightful, and very kind person. I'm so proud and excited to have Nadav for a conversation because I think just as I have found inspiration from Nadav for many years now, our families are friends. I think that many, many more people really need to hear from you in your voice. You are a published writer, and we'll be showing those in the notes. And anyways, so hi, Nadav.
Hi, everybody. Wow, what a interesting experience to be on a podcast. This is my first one, so the viewer and the listener, you're going on this journey with me.
Yeah, that makes two of us. This is new for me too. So I'm just so excited. So the first question I tend to ask people coming on for a conversation is really whatever you want to share with us about your journey, about your story, what you do, whatever you want. The floor is yours.
I'll start off. It's interesting to introduce oneself, and it's also interesting doing it on a format where who's going to listen to this? You have no idea. It's just completely public, and I just want to help people, right? So it's funny. It's funny. You said I'm a world traveler and I'm a young Jewish professional. I said the young Jewish professional, and it's interesting because I wonder at the end of the day, we all put these masks. We all present the world a specific version of ourselves, and those things are all true. And when I hear them, it's almost like okay, those are true, and there's this, and there's that. And it's weird because I'm not able to see the person who's listening to this right now. But a bit about me, I'll say about my story. I'll say some of I guess, the general stuff. So my name is Nadav, like Alana said. I was born in Israel. I have two older sisters. At the age of 2.5, when I was a little kid, I used to always say three because my sisters were in Israel longer than I was, and I always kind of like was like, no, I'm also like Israeli. But at the age of 2.5, I moved to the United States with my family to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is funny because Alana's actually also lived in Pittsburgh, but we'll talk about that later. And that's where I lived. I lived there for 10 years. That was kind of my childhood and adolescence. And then I moved to Orlando, Florida at the age of 12, actually right before my bar mitzvah. We'll get into that. And then I lived in Orlando for 6 years. And then at the age of 18, I moved to Israel, which at the time was under the pretense of going to do the army, which we can also get into. And since then, I've been in Israel. I'm now 24, and I never thought that I would be in Israel for the past 6 years and have not been back to America since. And it is a crazy, crazy journey.
Wait, you haven't been back to the States since you moved 6 years ago?
Okay, so pretty much And I like to say 6 years because I was back in
Wow.
the States in 2020 for 1 month during COVID. And I literally went from the airport to my house, was in what's it called? Bidud, was in
Quarantine. Yeah, we had to do that funky thing.
right. So I was in, this is during the COVID days. So I was in quarantine for 2 weeks. I was in my parents' basement. I wasn't even allowed to, actually, I think my mom let me hug her and then she like took a shower right afterwards. But I wasn't even allowed to like see them. So that was like 2 weeks. And then the 2 weeks later, I didn't leave the house. And then I got right back on the plane and came back to us. So I don't consider that being in America. But yeah, technically in 2020, I was there for a month. So I say 6 years because in 2019 is when I first came to Israel after high school, pretty much.
Wow. Okay. And so, as you wanted and requested, you have Tourette's. In my introduction, that was not like
Yeah,
fluently,
yeah, yeah, of course.
said, but like I introduced you as, this young professional with Tourette's syndrome. So do you want to talk? You just kind of gave us this like chronological like story of where you've been geographically. We haven't even gotten into where I hope we get to with your world travels.
Totally,
Um,
we'll get into all of it. We have so much time. And the
oh my
listener,
goodness.
wherever you are on the toilet, driving to work, taking your kids to school, get ready. I hope you're ready.
So like can you just because okay, can we talk about the Tourette's for a minute?
Of course. That's why
So
I mentioned it. That's how you should introduce.
I do not know at all like pretty much anything about Tourette's syndrome. So can you share, given that you just kind of shared with us your childhood and like how you've ended up now in Israel, how what Tourette's syndrome is and how that kind of played out obviously in a way that you're comfortable sharing and in a way that would be helpful for the listener to hear, to learn more and to better understand that childhood growing up, maybe with those moves and those transitions. Like, yeah, can you let us know like what you want us to know about it and how that kind of was a factor, maybe?
So it's funny. As I'm speaking now, it's crazy because I never once thought in my life, especially little enough, the little child that we all have enough. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of frustration with Turks and Tourette, and we'll get into that more in a second. But I never once thought I would introduce myself as, the guy with Tourette. 'Cause it's weird because I'm so much more than that, as you know. But it's such
Yes.
an important thing to talk about because all of us have our stuff, whatever that is, whether it's a diagnosis or whether it's something. We all have something, and we're all imperfectly perfect, right? And we're all kind of extraordinarily ordinary. And it's that duality, not dualism, duality that we all kind of have. But so I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome officially at the age of 16. Unofficially, when I first came to the States, like I had mentioned previously, at 2.5, at 3 at this point, my mother, one of our first family friends, we lived on a dead end street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if anybody's familiar with Squirrel Hill, that's where we worked. And it's very much this kind of kibbutz vibe. And one of the families, the mother was a neuroscientist or a neurologist, I think a neurologist. And she pretty much told my mom, your son has tics. He has Tourette's. Mom was like, no, he only has ADHD or some behavioral issues. Because for those of you who don't know, I didn't really explain this, but Tourette syndrome is officially defined as we currently know in 2025 as a neurodevelopmental disorder. But it's also a syndrome. And it's all sorts of funny things. So for me, understanding I had Tourette was a really challenging and interesting process. And I say that now looking back at it because I'm smiling. If somebody's watching this video, you can see me smiling. And it was totally not like that. It was much more of a lot of self abnegation, a lot of self rejection. Um, and it showed up. Tourette is weird because a lot of people think of Tourette as it's been displayed in pop culture as, the person who's cursing or the person who's jerking around or, uncontrollable movement, things like that. But there's this really great image that if maybe the listener can close their eyes for a second, if you're driving, don't do that. But if you can close your eyes, to imagine an iceberg. And at the top of the iceberg, there's these two little halves. And one half we'll say is vocal and phonic tics, and on the other half we'll say is physical tics. And those are things like I'll do a couple now. Hopefully, I won't trigger myself because I'm doing a pretty good job of suppressing, which I'll get into later. But if you can imagine a vocal tic, it's something kind of like it could be clearing your throat. It could be something small as like sniffling. it's even out, I just did one without realizing it. That's kind of more of a vocal tick. And a physical tick is, as implied, something like your shoulder jerking. So if you're watching kind of like your body moving, these are really small ticks. Usually they're really aggressive, and they're really, they can be painful. You'll get bruises and things like that. And it can be really challenging. But yeah, underneath this iceberg, that's kind of the tip of it. But underneath the iceberg are all these other, we'll call it by the scientific term. I don't like it so much, but we'll call them comorbidities. And what that is it could be anything from handwriting difficulties to ADHD to rage to you see it with children a lot, like biting, things like that. I know
Mm.
I don't have any recollection of this, but I know when I was a little kid, my mom used to say that I used to bite, things like that, because there's usually a lot of energy in a child who does not is not able to speak. A toddler actually will usually take that out in the form of biting. It's a lot of other comorbidities. OCD is a big one. Some people have autism. There's a lot of different comorbidities, and maybe afterwards I'll tell you, Alana, I can send you this image of an iceberg, and you can show it if someone's interested. But
Okay.
pretty much throughout my childhood, I'd experienced all sorts of different things. So for me and myself, the first things was what I now know is ADHD, which pretty much was me as a kid. I had a lot of energy and I was very interested in stuff. And I remember being in school, and this was at the I don't know if I should say the name, but at the local Jewish school in Pittsburgh. Um, and Jewish schools in general, in my subjective experience, don't tend to be the best with dealing with children who have different needs.
Okay.
Very good at Jewish education, but not necessarily with other things. And so,
Nadav, I'm so sorry. Can you hold that thought for 1 second? Because my
sure,
dog is insisting on coming into my office. This is
yeah,
how
yeah,
we roll. This is how we roll. Don't lose that
good.
thought. Hold on 1 second. Pooch, you want to come in? You have to be quiet. You have to be quiet. We try to, manage for all kinds of possibilities. He's been walked, fed, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter. He's wants to sit next to me. I apologize. Okay, please continue.
So let me know if I'm still on the right track. I was talking about like Jewish day school not being able to deal with the with
Like
different
able
kids.
to work with, it depends on the school, obviously, but with, neurodiversity in general.
That's a good
Um,
word to use. Let's use that word. And
okay,
you're right. Like I said, it depends on the school, and that's why I wanted to
it
use the word
does.
subjective. This is completely subjective. This is my experience, and that is in no way telltale of somebody else's experience. And that's a really important thing I want to emphasize is that even with Tourette syndrome, it's so different with every single person. I've met many people with Tourette. Every single one, it's like a different thing. They have different triggers, different ways that it shows. It's a very weird syndrome. And even as somebody who has lived with it my whole life, it's still a challenge and a journey and a joy and all these amazing things to figure out what it is. So don't be hard on yourself if you're like, what is he talking about? But anyways, when I was in this Jewish school, I had speech impediments. For example, I didn't actually speak till the age of 4. I didn't know if you know that, Elon, but I didn't
Like
actually.
Einstein.
Yeah, so bad as a child. So I'll go into the mindset of the child. As a child, it's like, why can't I speak? People are making fun of me because I don't
Hmm.
know how to say words. I can't express myself. I was also a really big kid. Now I'm 6'4", and back then I was like half the size of my teacher. I look at photos of myself of like 5, 6 years old, and I was a really big kid, right? And it's cute and it's funny, but I'll tell you from my experience, it was really difficult because you're this big kid, you don't fit in, and you're also treated like an older kid, and you're
Yeah,
5 years old being treated like an 8-year old. And when you're that young, those are big differences. And so people will not only treat you differently, they look at you differently. And it starts to make you self-aware in a negative way of it's almost like this too self-aware of what's wrong with me as opposed to where as an adult you can say no, that other person is not doing something right.
right.
But anyways, there was things like handwriting difficulties, speech impediments, like I had said. I had a lot of energy. I was asking a lot of questions. Teachers didn't necessarily want to answer them. It was hard for me to sit still. Recess was an amazing time for me. But I also was getting bullied a lot just because I had a lot of energy and I would also twitch a lot. And those were difficult times. And pretty much from kindergarten to third grade, I was at this school. And by third grade, I had to switch schools for a couple different reasons. One of them was the two kids who were really bullying me a lot. their parents were big donors to the school, and my parents had spoken with the administration about what was happening. And the administration already knew that I was, as they put, a problematic child, which pretty much what that meant is that I was having challenges sitting still in class. I was having challenges with some grades, and I'll keep this in mind. This is a lot of for a third grader who's getting C's and B's. Those aren't good grades, and considering what I was doing, it was I was it was less important, I think. But pretty much the administration said we're not able to give Nadav the care that he needs in a
Mm-hmm.
not the nicest way. And so in third grade, I switched to a public school. And in this public school, I was now the new kid on the block. And in some ways, it was good because it put me into a much more diverse environment, which kind of looking and reflecting back on that now, I was able to go to see kids from literally all over the world. I look at yearbooks and there was kids from Turkey and from even Africa, like this Nigerian kid. There was also African Americans. I mean, from all over the world. I mean, I can't even list it up, but it was really interesting because it was just a regular public school. Um, but there also the bullying persisted, and a large part of that was due to the Tourette. Imagine a kid who's kind of always moving, jumping around, making noises, and it's really difficult to sit still. Or when he's sitting still, for example, during a test, you're making noises, and the kid thinks that's funny, and the
Right.
teacher don't necessarily understand what Tourette is, and the ones who do have their preconceived notion of what Tourette is. So this is the weird part, Alana. Your kid doesn't have Tourette. He's just being a nuisance, and deal with him. And so as a child, you see your parents struggling with not because there's something wrong with you, but because they want what's best for their son. But you see that struggle. And as a child, similar to you'll see this with children of divorced parents,
Mm.
um, they tend to take a lot of responsibility on themselves, even though it's nothing to do with them. So as a kid, I would see my parents going through a lot of these challenges of, this school won't take him, this school won't take him. Anyways, in sixth grade, I ended up switching schools again because that school wasn't sufficient. And so this is when it kind of began this idea of you're lesser than, you're not good enough. A lot of this, well, let's use the word shadow. These shadow cells started to develop, and this is also around the time when you're about 10, 11, and you're starting to grow up. You're starting to get in a sense of yourself. Your consciousness is starting to become something you're more aware of, um, and it was difficult. Um,
Well,
in
don't forget puberty is around the corner.
puberty as well, right? And then you get smacked with all these hormones, and it's like, what is happening here? So
I
in
mean, it's a
sixth
hot mess for people, just kind of a baseline for most for many of us.
It is. And what I'll say, you had mentioned changes when I had first mentioned kind of the biographical story of myself. Change with people, change in general is difficult. Change is the nature of evolution. It's the nature of our world, whether we like it or not. Change is the only constant, right? We all kind of know that. And it's a tough truth, and it's so much easier said than done. The
Yes.
listener, like, I'm saying this now, I struggle with this a lot. So you're not alone if it's like, oh, he just said change the other constant, obviously, but it doesn't make it any easier. Um, with someone with Tourette, um, and I don't know the exact study, but there's a few studies that have been done. I think it was at Stanford and also McGill University, Canada, that neurologically there's actually the way that change is processed with somebody who has Tourette. They've classified it as it being more difficult. Now, I don't like to think that way because it feels to
Mm.
me almost like a bit of a victim mindset of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this way because it's more difficult. But I just know change in general is difficult, but I also know that people with Tourette's particularly struggle with change. And so in sixth grade, with the puberty starting around the corner, having switched schools 2 points at the 2 times at this point, also being bullied, we moved to Orlando, Florida. And at the time, I remember feeling excited. And let's talk about what is excitement. We usually associate excitement with a positive thing, right? It's fun. Your central nervous system is popping. It's like, ooh, I feel good, right? But
Right.
excitement can also be when you're nervous, you're excited, right? And it's your pretty much your central nervous system is stimulated, and it's not always a positive thing. And I remember the difficulty of leaving behind certain comforts, be
Mm.
that the bedroom that I had, be that a few of the friends that I had fostered while in Pittsburgh. and even be that the little community that I had. And I also remember the excitement of kind of, okay, I can leave all the bullies behind and this is a new chapter. And it actually ended up being a really good thing. And so when I moved to Orlando, Florida, in seventh and eighth grade, those were I went to another Jewish school, but this Jewish school was actually a much better experience. And I made some really good friends, and overall, those were two really good years. There were other challenges that maybe we'll get to in a later podcast because I want to focus more on the threat in this one. Um, but those were interesting times because it's also again you're moving to a new school, and for whatever reason during those years, the Tourette had subsided a bit. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean for Tourette's to subside? Tourette is something that's constantly changing and uh, developing. It's kind of like anti-Semitism in a weird way because anti-Semitism.
All
It's
right,
a
we're going there.
think about it. Anti-Semitism is a virus, right? It's always mutating. It's always changing. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's the worst, right? So Tourette, in that sense, it's kind of like okay, I don't know why, I don't know how, but like sometimes it's like the safe place, and then it becomes bad, right? And then sometimes the difficult place, it becomes better, and so it's always mutating. It's I could talk more about Tourette in the lens of academia, but it's more so I feel it's gone on a bit of a straight point from the original question, which I want you to remind me of because I've lost that, I think.
My original question was about your story, your journey, what you do. But I before we even like go back to that, I want to understand more. First of all, am I mispronouncing it when I say Tourette syndrome? Am I like sticking this S in where there really shouldn't be? It's not Tourette's, or
I've heard
is
people say Tourette's, and I've also heard people say Tourette syndrome. I'm honestly not exactly sure. I used to think it was Tourette's, but then it's like Tourette's if with the apostrophe, it's like you have it because it's like
Mhm.
possessive. I don't care.
Okay, and then so you mentioned what you termed comorbidities, which again, I understand what you're saying about not really loving that term, but you mentioned tics, you mentioned some other
OCD,
things,
ADHD,
right?
handwriting difficulties, rage, yeah.
So what is you? I mean, because people can people have tics without it being Tourette's, or is
Yeah,
it
yeah,
right?
that's a good question,
And
actually. Yeah.
ADHD, you can have ADHD or ADD, you can have a whole bunch of things without it being Tourette's. So help me understand what is kind of the secret sauce to making it a diagnosis of Tourette's versus some other neurodivergent descriptions.
So that's a good question. I mean, this is probably best answered by like a medical professional, like your husband.
No,
But
no, because you live it. You live it. So I want to know how you understand it so that I understand it from someone who's living it and experiencing it as opposed to the, you know,
I
textbook.
would say someone with Tourette, you can have for someone to have Tourette, I think I'm trying to sway away from the medical definitions because my mind is immediately like, oh, what's the medical definition? But you want me to focus on the real lived
However
experience.
you want to answer it, just because, for me, it sounds like it could potentially be a big mishmash of various things that we hear about,
Yeah.
for other children who are neurodivergent with different descriptors, right? So,
Yeah.
it's the Tourette part. I understand it with the physical, like you explained, and with the vocal. And so you don't necessarily have the physical and the vocal with ADHD. Is that one way to understand it,
But someone
or?
he may not even have tics or may not even have Tourette. And from my understanding, I'll say the medical definition of Tourette is a persistent amount of vocal and physical tics for a period of time. For example, one of my sisters has tics, and that is that she has physical tics and some vocal tics, but they're not persistent. And it's not for an extended period of time. If there's a doctor listening to this, I'm probably really messing with this definition, but we're not going to go down
We're not
that
giving
lane.
medical advice or
Yeah,
diagnoses.
definitely not. Just spiritual and mental and the human experience advice. Um,
100%.
in
So
terms of
it's
how,
interesting. Sorry, Nadav. So what I'm hearing you say though is that it is something to do with persistence and over a certain amount of time.
yeah, yeah. Like
Okay.
since I was a kid and looking again, life must be lived forward. It can only be understood backwards, right? So looking back as a kid, I'm like, I can't. It's not. It's. I don't like it because we think of ADHD, and I actually wrote an article about this. We think about it as a disorder, right? It's like something wrong with your brain, and life in general is not. even if you look at an expert, a medical expert, they're really smart in this one area, but they tend to lack somewhere else in a lot. So is that a disorder? No, they're really smart because as a society, we've deemed that as a positive trait. So with ADHD, on the one hand, it's difficult to focus on something that maybe isn't as interesting to me, or I'll have a lot of different thoughts. Like right now, I'm going on all these different quote unquote tangents that are really interesting. I'm like, oh, this is really important, and this is really important. And actually, I have to talk about this to explain that so you can really understand. On the other hand, I'm really creative. It gives me a lot of an ability, it gives me a great ability to be able to explain things, to go in depth in things, and also, I don't know if this is ADHD, but to retain information, right? Like for me, it allows me, like, I'm interested in a lot of different things, and maybe this is more me and Nadav, not ADHD, but because I'm interested in everything, I tend to retain that, and I'm like, oh, well, I can explain that later. Um, and then, but in terms of how all these different things manifested, like OCD, for example, um, OCD manifests itself in four different ways. And I'm totally blanking on the four different types of OCD there are. But one of the big ones that there is for me is intrusive thoughts, really disturbing intrusive thoughts. And sometimes, and this is the weird part for the viewer, the listener, logically, I know that doing a compulsion, which is an action, won't stop or change that thought. So let's give you an example. I have the thought that my mom is going to die if I don't skip across the room. Kasveh Khalila, right? Tfu, tfu, tfu. If I don't skip across the room.
Right.
As a child, I'm terrified, terrified that if I don't skip across the room, that's going to happen. So I skip across the room. The teacher's looking at me like, you're being a class clown. All the kids are laughing. It's hilarious. What are you doing? And I'm sitting there trying to smile and laugh it off and feeling out of control in my own body. A tick, for example, is something I'm not even aware of. I may have even twitched a couple of times just talking now, and I'm not even aware of it. Something that just happens. The only thing I could compare to for the listener who doesn't necessarily have Tourette is imagine a sneeze that you kind of maybe sometimes know it's coming, or it'll just catch you out of the blue, and you'll sneeze, or you have an itch and you can't not itch it, and just kind of there, and it's going to happen either way, and but you already have awareness. Or sometimes when you're going to sleep and your body just twitches. It's like, whoa, okay, like your leg jerks. It's like completely out of nowhere. And so having OCD antics is really weird because I remember as a kid, a lot of times doctors would try to understand, is it a tick? Is it a convulsion? And I was like, it doesn't matter. I'm struggling with it. Can we deal with it, right? Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
and that was really tough because it almost felt like I was a medical experiment. And that was something that took me time to get over. Um, but I guess that answers your question, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so how much would you say is also about like the N of one, right? How much of experiencing Tourette is very, like you said, it's different for, for everybody. So, does that make it harder then to get the support you need, whether it's through the medical field or the education field, because it can't be really put in a box?
It's a good question. I think it definitely does make it more difficult because it's funny, and I like your terminology with the box because I think medically, at least the way that I've been treated a lot, is it's very much trying to put things in boxes, right? You have such and such, you are such and such.
Mm,
And I'll give you an example with Tourette because why is it so unique? I, for example, will get really twitchy when it's humid and hot. And when it's cold, it's really nice for me. It's soothing. I love cold
mm,
baths. I don't love doing them because it's not fun, but when I'm in it, I'm like, oh my God, this is great. Um, I know people with Tourette who, when they're cold, they are twitching like it is nobody's business. And
okay.
when they are hot, they are calm and soothed and relaxed. Now, these are completely different triggers, but this is the same syndrome. It's the
Mm,
same syndrome. Somebody with Tourette, actually, when I was recently traveling abroad, I met this Israeli guy, and he had a persistent tick. His shoulder was shrugging constantly. He could not stop shrugging his shoulder, and he would make these little noises. What was his trigger? Stress and anxiety. Now that is a commonality, right? Stress and anxiety. But what was his stress? Just being in an uncomfortable situation. Now, an uncomfortable situation is really subjective. For him, being uncomfortable was that we were in a foreign country and that was uncomfortable for him. For me, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm experiencing a foreign country. And I, for whatever reason, felt more comfortable. And so I wasn't feeling as twitchy. So in terms of things being put in boxes, it's it's more difficult, I guess, to put it into a box in terms of receiving help. Growing up in the West, in the States specifically, the main course of action besides cognitive behavioral therapy as a treatment for Tourette syndrome and other things like my parents were amazing with this is physical activity, getting sports, which is a great release, is pharmaceuticals. And the issue that I have with pharmaceuticals, and I want to preface this by saying if any of the listeners take pharmaceuticals, more power to you. And I mean that with all the genuine authenticity that I can possibly get across. If something works for you, continue it. There's no reason to stop it. There's no inherent harm in any one thing. If something works for you, it's good. For me, there's no treatment for Tourette's. So doctors, as of right now in this moment of time in 2025, there's no one pill that is the magic pill. So they'll give
Mm.
you different cocktails of pills and they'll try to find different pharmaceutical mixes to alleviate the symptoms. Now, what's the problem with that in my experience? Is it causes side effects, which then they try to give you more prescriptions for those side effects. And not only that, they're giving you prescriptions that are really, if you read what they do, it's really scary. A lot of things that I was prescribed that I refused to take were things like Haldol, antipsychotics, antidepressants. Um, Even there was this one. It was a it's something that was initially a heart medication that they
Mm.
found helped reduce anxiety and helped with ADHD. So all of these things I was being prescribed, and I felt at the time broken. I'm bad. I remember this is more of the childhood things coming up, something
Yeah.
wrong with me, how I'm going to get fixed. And as a child, you look to the authority. You're knowing better than I am. You're going to help me. So you try these things, but it messes with you because also you're a growing child. Your brain is going through fantastical changes, and you're influencing that with these pharmaceutical medications, which we don't know that much about. We're talking about 100 years, which is really nothing in the scheme of things of how much we actually know. And if you look at what medical practice, common medical practice was 100 years ago, we think some of that stuff's kind of messed up. So I guarantee you, if at some point in the space-time continuum, some one viewer of this podcast watches this 100 years from now, you're gonna be like, God, what were they doing back then? The freaking like the lunatics. Why were they giving people these like antipsychotics for Tourette syndrome? Why didn't they just take blood da, 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 or like go and take cold showers and exercise? Like, why didn't we prescribe people that? Which, on a little tangent, that was partly for me. If it isn't clear now, I was prescribed some of these medications, and for a period of time, I did take them. Specifically, when I was 16, I was going through a particularly difficult point in my life, and I was prescribed these medications, and they did help me for a period of time. But over time, my quality of life was just not what it was, and I felt numb. I didn't feel myself. Um, and eventually, I did something kind of radical. I started doing my own research, and I was really, really slow about it. This was when so from the age of 16, I was prescribed a few bit different medications, and I was taking them. And by the age of 21, I decided, and it was something I say 21 I decided because I knew from age pretty much 16, 17 when I first started them, I was like, this isn't right, this isn't the answer. But you're full of self-doubt. You're also trying to get through high school. There was other things that I can get into later that was influencing those decisions. But by the age of 21, I was like, this isn't me. I don't want to be doing this anymore. Why am I still taking these medications? So I was doing my own research and I slowly started tapering off these medications. Every doctor, neurologist, psychiatrist, psychologist I went to would tell me to my face, you are crazy, like you're insane. This is not a good idea. You don't know what you're talking about. I remember even one. This is in Israel at this point. Um, One actually told me you should be committed to a facility. Like this is not okay. Like you're doing something wrong. And I thought to myself, I was like, you don't know that much about me. This is through the Israeli medical what's it called, like the Kupat Cholim, the
Right. It's a socialized medical system.
right. And so
But
this person doesn't know me other than a couple pieces of paper according to my ID number, and they're telling me what's best for me. And these situations at the time sparked self-doubt, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But for whatever reason, it was during these really difficult times, I was like, no, like I know what I'm doing. And trusting yourself is a very difficult thing to do, but it's also very rewarding. And I remember saying, I don't have to take this medication. There's no way that for the what 300,000 years that Homo sapiens have been around, that Tourette syndrome or ADHD or whatever we want to call these things that we have terms for nowadays were dealt with through these medications that have only existed for the past 100 years. There have to be other ways. So it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to taper off these medications. It's how can I find ways to use the power within my body to not replace, but to provide a salve for myself. And so as I was tapering off these medications, I also started exercise a lot more, which is something I had been doing, but I had stopped because when I started these medications, I lost my drive to do that because it numbed me. And there's a lot of issues with the pharmacological the chem the chemistry, the pharmacology, and the biology of how it can affect a growing brain, somebody who's under the age of 25. But I had started exercising more. I started changing my diet. There's a lot of research that we now know about how your gut is literally your second brain and how your
Mhm.
gut literally affect your well-being, right? Think about it's in our language, go with your gut. What's your gut tell you to do? And so we think about if you really think about it, that's a big factor. And I started looking into what we would call alternative ways to deal with Tourette syndrome. And I started implementing those into my life. And as I was doing that, I was slowly tapering off the medication. Now, as I was doing that, it was raising these feelings because all of a sudden you're literally changing your brain's chemical structure. You're not your chemical structure, but your brain is used to taking these medications for a period of time. All of a sudden you're not taking them, or you're taking lower doses, and your brain is kind of like, what's happening? What am I doing? And this is, by the way, in the middle of university at this point. This is when I'm 21. I'm like, it was sticking with what I knew in my gut, but still doubted at the time, as we all do. Every single person, we all have our doubts. But it's sticking with that and saying, I got this. Like I know that this is not the right answer. This pharmaceuticals, and I know that I have the power within me. And eventually, I actually got off all of these things. I got off every medication, and I haven't been on one since. And every doctor I've spoken to is still saying, you're struggling with some anxiety. You should try this medication. I said, could I just try? Would you prescribe maybe running 4 times a week instead? And they're like, no, because like we don't know if that works. I'm like, okay, interesting. Um, but yeah, I guess that was a kind of a really long answer to
Wow.
that.
No, this is all fascinating. It goes without saying, medical disclaimer, medical disclaimer, medical disclaimer. None of us are are advising any medical advice. This is
But I want the viewer, the listener, to know that this is like a very small segment of my overall experience, and this is not beyond a medical disclaimer. It's not advice. This is how I managed to get through something. And if you're more interested about it afterwards, you can send me a message, and Alana will attach a way to talk to me about it. But don't do don't do something, even if quote unquote you think it's the best thing to do, without really consulting your family, consulting professionals around you, doing research. Don't just make a rash decision. But yes, medical, whatever it is, advisory,
kind of disclaimer. La, la, la.
disclaimer.
No, I've had to do this with, I think, all of my conversations now, just whatever. But I mean, so it sounds like what has been working for you includes diet, definitely includes your personal development and your mental attitude and your framing of things, right? That's on the like a cognitive-ish level. And then physical exercise, which I know there is research out there that, physical exercise can be as effective as I think it's an anti-anxiety or an antidepressant. I don't remember which one, but there is research out there about the efficacy of physical, movement. And we do know that movement, um, you know, is we all, most of us feel a lot better when we move. The stagnation is not our natural way of being, regardless of any other challenges physically or mentally that
Just
we may have.
if you think about exercise, and it shouldn't be surprising that it's such a powerful tool, because what is, for example, going on a run. And this is not my original quote. This is something that I read somewhere, but it's popping out right now as you said that.
Yeah, yeah.
Running and exercising is kind of the opposite of a drug. Why? Because when you're running, it doesn't feel good when you're doing it. You feel weak. You don't feel let's say, pleasant, comfortable, positive emotions all the time, although sometimes you can. But afterwards, you feel relief, you feel good. When you're taking a drug or medication, feels fine or great or good or pleasant when you're doing it. Afterwards, or as you continue it, you kind of don't necessarily feel as good.
Right. Well, I mean, that's yeah. What you can get the runner's high, right? You can get the endorphin kick from it from the physical.
I don't even know if it's a runner's high because I have to say I never
I mean, I
had
don't
that.
run. I've read about it.
I hate running. I run because it's totally the mental game for me. I don't enjoy running. I don't enjoy physical activity per se. I enjoy moving my body, stretching. I enjoy it, but the cardio, all that stuff, I don't enjoy it. It's totally because I know that it's good for my brain, and it's me deciding this is my medication. I know that this
Yes.
is going to be good for me. This is what I have to do.
So that's very much a decision that you've made to incorporate
It's
it in your
pretty much
life.
telling myself you can take pharmaceuticals, which is what the societal standards are telling you, or you can do something that you have done a lot of research on for many years. You've spoken with different professionals about, and you feel it's your life. This is what you want to do, and this is the decision you're going to make, and you're going to take control of that. And that's that taking charge, we'll say.
And then you also mentioned, we're obviously not like a scientific body hacking podcast here, but you did
Not
mention how the gut is like the second brain, and there's a lot of research about that. So you're saying that I know for some of my friends who have children or they're, adults now with ADHD, severe in the sense of communication or, limited more communication and stuff, but that diet has been a huge factor. There's a huge issue there. And so you're saying that's also true with your experience with Tourette?
Yeah, 100%. I know example with the ADHD, and it's funny because ADHD for me, I kind of have both. I've been diagnosed with both at least. Um, People with ADHD crave sugar a lot, and for me as a kid, God bless my mother, she would make really good home cooked nutritious meals, and me as a kid would go to the mini market after school and get flaming hot Cheetos and Gatorade, and that I just loved that, and it made my ticks worse, and so I think as a parent
Mm.
as I become a young adult, I have a lot more empathy and compassion for any parent out there, maybe someone listening to this who has a young boy or girl, and you're like, I know that this diet is good for them. They're not listening. What am I supposed to do? And all I would say to that person is just keep on being you, give it time, consistency, and persistence in your own beliefs and practices will bring about something that they will realize in their own time and will be able to be traced back to you about something that you introduced to them that was beneficial.
Mic drop. Okay. So, you have this you identify as someone with Tourette's, right? Like that
Yeah.
is part of, how you wanted me to
The
introduce
identity.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll say
So,
yeah.
but it sounds like it's managed, right? So I mean, at least, from the little we're talking right now and from what you're sharing. So I guess let me ask you this. What would you want someone who knows somebody with Tourette to know that would be
This-
helpful?
yeah. The most simple answer I would say is that if you're ever frustrated by that person, um, and not something where it's like that person, said, gave you, said, I'm going to do something at a certain time, like, and they didn't, that's different. But I'm talking about, let's say that person's really twitching or, it's frustrating. They're making a lot of noises and you're in public and people are looking at you guys and, you kind of feel embarrassed because you're talking with your person. People are looking at you or he's or she is kind of twitching around and it's embarrassing to kind of be with somebody who's kind of, we'll say, making a scene that however embarrassed you feel or however annoyed or frustrated you feel, I guarantee you the person who has Tourette is 100, 200 times more embarrassed, scared, frustrated, angry than you could imagine. And to just be in the presence with that person, not necessarily trying to change or act or do anything, but just if you can find peace within yourself and you can exude that energy, it will help that person uh, in a way that you probably can't really imagine. And maybe the person can't imagine in that moment, but in the long term, in my belief, and this is not medical advice, is that Tourette at its core is energy. It's a lot of energy that doesn't necessarily have a place to go. And so a lot of time
Mm.
it's pushed out in these different ways. And when you're able to be in a peaceful situation, at least for myself with my Tourette, it calms that. When I'm in a forest, when I'm in nature, I do feel calmer. Whereas if I'm going to work and I'm on a bus and there's the hustle bustle or my boss is screaming at me,
Oh.
it doesn't help me as much, right? Um, and so I would say just the advice is just to be a calming presence as much as you can. And when it's not able, just be in presence with that person. Be in presence with the person and just know that you being there and not necessarily asking questions and just being yourself and not treating that person like something crazy is happening, just kind of letting them like push out is probably a good thing.
So, I mean, what you're describing sounds like, being a compassionate, considerate human being, which should not be a big ask, but we know that sometimes it is. Would it be helpful to kind of not, there's a part of me which is like, oh, I would want to ask, like, hey, is there something you need? Is there anything I can do to help? Or there's the other part of me which is like, let's just pretend nothing's going on and just hang out and like ignore. Like, so what? Those are like the two things that just popped in
Great
my head.
question. Great question. And it totally depends on the individual. And
Sure.
what you said, it makes me think of something else. I think as humans, we tend to I think the general goodness in us wants us to help other people. More often than not, and we're all kind of guilty of this in some sense, we help people in the way that we think they need to be helped. Whereas
Yes.
what we should do is help people the way that they need to be helped. And that's really a tough thing to think as how can you really help somebody if you're not in their shoes? And oh, you can say, oh, don't judge somebody if you don't put yourself in their shoes. Well, you're never going to be in their shoes. So how do you help somebody in a way that they are that they need to be helped, not in the way that you want to help? And there's not necessarily a right answer to this. Many things in life, many of the big questions in life, there's no one right answer. There's many answers. What I would say is one thing: communication. If the person's willing to talk about it, have open communication with the person. The more you can learn and talk with them, the more they'll be understanding. Communication is this wonderful thing. The fact that we're speaking, making these different noises, and that we're understanding each other. Language as itself is a construct. The fact that I can say fact and you know what fact means, right? This is a great resource we have as humans. And so if we utilize that as a communication, it can really help somebody because at the end of the day we get so stuck in our day-to-day lives. I have to make money, I want to raise kids, I want to find a wife or a husband, who, if you're a woman listening to this or gay, whatever, we have these big questions in life. I want to have grandchildren, right? But at the end of the day, we're living in humans. This is not Tourette, this is just humans in general. We're kind of living in this um, really kind of a whimsical state between these two darknesses. Before you're born and after you die, we don't really know what there is. We can speculate, and we're all at these different points in our life. We'll call them age, right? 40, 20, 30, whatever, in between that. And when you're a young child and when you're an old person, you need a lot of help. You need a lot of kindness. You need people to take care of you. And in between, we kind of lose that sense of being kind to one another. And if you can communicate with people, if you can have an open heart and an open mind and go to a conversation, not trying to prove or project what you think you know onto somebody and actually say, what can I learn from this person? You'll not only build and gain yourself, you'll make the world a better place by these small interactions do have that butterfly effect. And so this all ties back to a person who, if you have somebody in your life who has Tourette and you're not sure how to help them, if they're willing to talk with you, talk. And if they're not willing to talk with you, my advice, which who knows if that's the right thing, is to just be yourself and be compassionate, be considerate, be open-minded, be kind, and also where you think you can help, do your best to
Okay, you hear my dog in the background?
do.
Yeah. Doobie, sorry. Please hold because I have an important follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Moosh goosh, you are no old man. You go sit in your bed. Bye. Okay, so I appreciate that answer from it sounds to me like a philosophical kind of answer, right? Which is very nice, but I'm wondering for those of us listening who might not know anyone who has Tourette's, you're out with your kids or you're out with your friends or whatever, and you see someone, a stranger, who is twitching or has, their tics or their vocal tics, what would be, since you're not going to have a conversation necessarily with that person, what would
You're
be,
talking about like a stranger.
sorry?
I'm sorry. When you first when you asked the first question, I thought it's like if you have somebody that you know in your life, like a friend
Yeah.
or a family
Now I'm
request.
switching it.
Oh, okay, different question. Okay,
Now I'm
cool.
switching it. Yeah, now I'm asking for like, that kind of short, like I can take this away the next time I hear, that I'm physically either around someone or, I mean, obviously not passing because then you can ignore anything when you're, but
Right.
if you're in a place, let's say
In a waiting
where,
room. Yeah, in a waiting room at a doctor's office kind of
yeah,
thing,
where
and
it
there's
feels disruptive, like you said, right? Where it feels like, you know,
it's a
what,
really yeah, it's a tough question. It's disruptive. It's like sorry to interrupt, but it's like
no, no,
you're
no,
sitting
no.
in a waiting room and there's a person and everybody's quiet reading, I was gonna say reading the newspaper, but I guess people are on their phones nowadays. And this person is like just kind of making these noises and jerking around. My answer is a bit different because I think as someone with Tourette, I can have maybe an understanding in a way that somebody else might not. But my personal thing is to just kind of sit and be yourself. Now, I don't know if that's the right answer. I really don't know if that's the right answer. And if it's
Hmm.
really disruptive, what I would say is do your best to take care of yourself without disturbing that person. Because that
Hmm.
person also, we don't know, they may not have Tourette. We're assuming they have Tourette. They may have, if they're not making, for example, they don't have vocal tics and they're just spazzing, they might have Parkinson's, or if they may be on drugs. I don't know. We have
I hear
no idea
you.
what's happening at any given point. So, and this is maybe just in life in general, but if you see something that you don't particularly understand, we tend to make judgments pretty quick, all of us. Even the people who advise don't make judgments. We all make judgments, and something to be aware of, and something we can always work better on. If that's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but if you so apply that to any situation, when, for example, I'll bring up my boss again, screaming at work. I'm coming on this podcast after a hard day at the office, so this is what's on my
Mhm.
mind.
Are you going back to the office? You sure you want to, I'm just
No, 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 okay, so I don't want to lose the point. So, and when my boss is screaming at me, and I know I haven't done anything wrong, and my colleague is kind of like, yeah, this is just her going on her rant. I don't think, God, she is such a bitch, or God, she's so annoying. I'm like, no, I have no idea what's going on in her life. I have no idea what her childhood, her adolescence, her adult life is like. I have things that I think I know, but I don't fully know. And it doesn't make it okay, by the way, what she's doing. If she's really, which sometimes she will, verbally harassing, right, or insulting,
mm,
it's also me knowing when I need to leave the situation. But I don't really know. And so I focus on the situation on imagining it's almost like every word or action that is hurtful, it kind of just brushes over your shoulder. And it's very easy to say and very difficult to do. But if you can not take something like that personally and realize it has nothing to do with you. For example, so the waiting room, somebody's twitching or making this noise, and it's like, wow, it's really annoying. Reflect, why is it annoying? Obviously, there's making a noise, maybe you're trying to focus, but the more, I think it was Carl Jung who said something like this, when the things that perturb us in others reflect more about what perturbs us about ourselves.
right.
And it's the same in any situation. It doesn't mean that if somebody is making a ruckus that it's okay. And there are certain points, especially I can imagine as a parent and as someone who's worked in childcare, there are certain points when children are, we'll say, crossing certain boundaries and that you do need to intervene. But if you're sitting and it's a doctor's office in this example we're talking about, sometimes the best thing to do is to take care of yourself. Put in some headphones, listen to some music, take a walk. Don't necessarily assume that you know what's best for that person. Now, for me, it's also a lot about reading the situation. Sometimes I personally, Nadav, will feel comfortable going up and maybe, saying, "Hey, are you okay?" Or not saying, "Are you okay?" but be just sitting next to him. Kind of, for me, it's reading the situation. I'm someone who I think has a pretty decent IQ, EQ, and can go and kind of read that situation. So it's hard to say this is what you should do because I think it's completely subjective. Also, it's weird about a podcast. For me, it's like how would I advise people? I want to speak to them and get to know them because I would not say the same thing to one person as I would to another person for no other reason than for me to be genuine and authentic with my advice. I want to understand what is this person really need, not what do I think is good for this person, right?
Okay. So I would like to segue with what you're saying into, if we can, please. I know there's a million ways we can, million rabbit holes we can go down, but I'm really curious, given what we're talking about with Tourette, how that manifested in your world travels. Because when I described you as a world traveler, I'm not exaggerating. It's not like you did a summer in Europe. So are you comfortable if we switch to the topic of your,
I want to say just rabbit holes. My mind talking about ADHD. We'll say like there's much to talk about. So if the viewer's interested, we can do more podcasts in the futures. Alana's going to be doing great things, so I'll be back. We'll see. And but anyways, yes, world travels. We'll talk about a Tourette and the twitchy traveler. We'll
the
talk about
Twitchy travel? You should make a
yeah.
Substack. That sounds good. The Twitchy Traveler.
Instagram I made. We'll see how it goes.
So,
Yeah.
wait, say that again.
Okay, so I made an Instagram. This is totally like I just made this. I don't know what's going to happen with it. It's called a tall twitchy traveler.
Oh my
Um,
God.
So I'm not sure what we're gonna do with that, but yeah.
We'll put all
But
the
anyway,
links in the comments, people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What is it like to travel with Tourette? It's a great question. What's it like to travel as Nadav? Let's see. So I think the first one you're referring to, because this is the first time I had spoken to you, is when I saw I think it's your grandfather, Ilana. He was buried in Uzbekistan. Is that correct? Or your great grand,
My great grandmother,
great
my
grandmother?
grandmother's mother passed when they were there during World War II. Yeah.
I did that. So let's see. Let me do some background. So while I was in university, there's a lot of missing polls. So I'm just going to answer this question, which is going to be tough for me to do because I feel like there's a lot of missing background, but that's okay. We'll answer that later on in future podcasts. Hopefully, the listener will be intrigued and want to know more. Um,
You know what?
I,
It's just, am I intrigued that we want to keep having conversations, and
okay,
whoever
yeah,
gets
yeah,
to
let's
join,
do.
I can't until I start hearing like, massive amounts of people who are requesting certain things,
That's
then,
true.
it's what's fun for us.
We got to be authentic to what Ilana Ivan's podcast is. And
It's
thank you for the correction. That's a very good point. Anyways, okay, so let's see. This is 2022. I'm 21 years old. I've just finished my second year of university in Israel. There's a 3-year degree, so I'm heading into my last year.
and it's
Um,
COVID.
and it's COVID. And I should mention this. This is good background. When I came to Israel, I had mentioned previously the army. I was looking, amongst many things, for a nice Jewish Israeli girl. This is something I had been thinking about for a long time. I was like, Israel's the place to do it, our homeland. This is where we're going to go. And I'd gone to all sorts of different avenues in that search. When I went to Bar Ilan University, which is a more religious university, it's one of the ones in Israel where you actually have to have Jewish credits to graduate. I was in the international school. And surprisingly, to my surprise at least, there's a lot of people from all sorts of walks of life from all over the world in this school. And during COVID, you get to know the international students a lot more. And I met a girl, and we became very good friends. And um, one thing led to another after a series of many hanging outs in groups and all sorts of stuff. And she became my girlfriend. And we had a wonderful relationship. And at this point in the relationship, we had been together for a year at this point, a bit over a year. I told her I want to travel and see where you're from. She's from Kazakhstan. And I had never traveled by myself at this point. And I had one of my best friends is from Uzbekistan. I thought to myself, I mean, I don't actually know exactly what through my mind at the time. It was probably influenced a lot by being in love. But I was like, okay, I want to go to Central Asia. Both my sisters, by the way, in Israel, for those of you who don't know, traveling is a big part of the culture. It's kind of like a rite of passage. Most people will do that in Southeast Asia, India, South America, and United States. That's like the main hubs where people go to. Um, People don't go to Central Asia, especially Israelis. Generally, I'm sure there's exceptions, but I was like, you know what? That sounds like a good adventure. So at 21 years old, By the way, this is when I was still taking a bunch of different medications. So I came with like a half of a suitcase of medication. So we'll get into that. That's another story. But um, um,
I'm
decided,
wondering
and
how that was at customs.
gonna say not custom, but I'll get into that story. But in terms of Tourette, that it was all for Tourette, right? Um, I flew into Uzbekistan and I landed in Tashkent, in Tashkent, and my friend picked me up, and I spent a week traveling around Uzbekistan with him and his family, which is a wonderful experience. And just to prelude this, when I traveled, I decided to take a printout of what is Tourette syndrome and explaining what is Tourette syndrome. Why am I
Oh.
acting this way? What is it? And I translate it into all the local languages of wherever I'm going. And it's really important because it's helped me get out of a lot of sticky situations.
Huh.
Because it pretty much says that if I'm in a situation and somebody's like, "What are you doing?" Because you could be on drugs because they don't speak the language, I don't speak it. I can be like, "Hold on, this is a real thing. Let me show you what it is." Um, so that's something I've always traveled with. But anyways, I was in Uzbekistan for a week. Um, when I went to Kazakhstan, I left my friend and I was by myself, and I got on a train, and I went to Kazakhstan by train. Now, this is right after COVID starts to like become a bit less of a thing. So people aren't really traveling, and the only travelers are Uzbeks, Kazakhs. There was a couple Tajiks and some Kyrgyz people, like local Central Asians, and me. And when I got
And you're how tall again?
6'4", twitching on the train, in the middle of ex-Soviet countries, with a box full, like a packet, like a luggage of medications, pills, we'll say. Okay, so I get to the customs on a train, it was a cool experience, by the way. I'd never been on like a train customs before. I go to the Uzbek side, and the Uzbeks come on board. They bring these dogs, sniffing for drugs, typical custom stuff. Um, and the customs officer, it's not as big of an issue because they're pretty much stamping you out of the country. But the customs officer kind of came up to me, like, very interested in my story. Um, she just kind of wanted to touch my hair, which is a weird thing. That's kind of a tangent. And I wasn't really comfortable with that, but it's also like the more I pushed away, the more she was suspicious. So I kind of just let her play with my hair. For those of you who are listening to this, I have long hair and curly hair. But when I got to the Kazakh side, um, that's when they were more interested. And
Mm.
pretty much the first thing they were like is, "Where's your visa?" And I did a lot of research ahead of time. I'm like, "I don't need a visa." They're like, "Yeah, you do need a visa." I'm like, a little bit of a panic, but like calming myself, like, "I don't. I have an Israeli passport. I don't need a visa." And then they called their superior. They took my passport. I'm sitting on a train. I don't have my passport now. They take it off. They come back and they're talking in Kazakh to themselves. And then these two guys come on with AK-74Us, which is a smaller version of the AK-47. And one of them cocks it and kind of lifts it up a bit. The other one's just standing kind of behind him. And at this point, I'm like, okay, what escalation has happened? How do I de-escalate the situation? And they tell me to open my bags in a pretty, how would I say, direct way. Um, at this point, I do know some Russian. I didn't want to tell them this, but I start like speaking with them a little bit, trying to de-escalate the situation. I learned some Kazakh because my girlfriend had taught me, and so they had to kind of like that. But pretty much, they look at my luggage, it's fine. Then they see all the medications, and when they see that, they're like, "What's this for? What's this for? What's this for?" And I'm telling them, I'm showing them the note. They look at the note, they don't believe it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Then go back, and they think I'm a drug trafficker because apparently people traffic drugs, and at
Apparently.
this point as well, I was traveling with my Irish passport as a backup and my American driver's license. So they see my American driver's license, my Irish passport, and my Israeli passport. They now think, and they said this to me afterwards, and you Google translated it to me afterwards, that they thought I was an international drug smuggler.
Like James Bond. Oh, James
But drug
Bond.
smuggler, right?
Right.
And at this point, I'm like, okay, I fucked up. Like, what's gonna happen? The guy has the gun pointed at me. They've taken my passport. They've gone off the train. I don't know what's happening. I'm like, am I gonna miss? Because my girlfriend said at this time we're gonna meet at this station. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna miss her. Like, I don't know where I'm going. Um, Pretty much to make the long story short, for about 30 minutes, I really had no idea what was going on. They had tested the drugs, make sure there was nothing wrong with them, to make sure they were real. I showed them the prescriptions, and they didn't read Hebrew, so they were like, "This is not a real prescription." I was like, "It is real," and I showed them the English. I was like, "This is real medication. Trust syndrome Israel." I had data, thank God, because I had gotten a SIM card. So I was like, this is what it is. It's real. I promise you. I started really finessing them with my Kazakh. I was like, I have a Kazakh girlfriend. Like, we're going to do, and I started talking about these local traditions, and they were like, oh, okay, cool, cool. On a side note, two of the guys, the ones with the guns, were kind of like, why are you coming to take our women? And then he started adding the Jewish lens of like Jewish guy coming in to take. That's like a 5 minute tangent I could go on, but it was also uncomfortable because they were kind of like, there was some subtle elders of Zion anti-Semitism in this conversation as well. But the main
Wow.
guy, the officer, was like, Jew, cool, Israel, cool. You're good with money. You're good for the economy. Come with us. I was like, you know what? My favor. Um, so eventually they let me through. They understood the medication was a real thing. They understood the Tourette was a real thing. They understood I was twitching because I was just twitching and that I was not on drugs. And they let me through.
Wow.
That was my first like uncomfortable experience traveling. Um, there was more experiences on that journey, but I believe the world traveling that you're referring to is my last trip, or is this also included the Central Asia one? Which one were you
Whatever
more?
you want, whatever you want. I mean, when I say world travel, like just run down quickly for the listener, like how many countries you've traveled to,
Okay, so I'll
if you
preface
would
this.
please.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I'll preface this again with, like many things in life, my dear listener, is that quantity is not quality, and that you will hear lots of countries, and it doesn't mean that I've seen everything there is to see, and it doesn't mean that I've seen something that is um, not like you can't see something more. For example, if I were to go back to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, it would be a completely new place because I saw it in a summer of 2022. It's a new country, in my opinion. Now time has lapsed and it's now new. But, anyways, where have I been? By myself, I have been to Georgia, the country, not the state, to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, India, and Vietnam. And in terms of transit, I was in the airport in Guangzhou, China, and the UAE, and Poland. I'm not missing any. In terms of travel that I've done, I'm sure the viewer will, I don't know if the viewers, but March of the Living, for those of you who don't know, it's a trip that is organized to go and kind of not tour, but to go do education about the Shoah, the Holocaust in Poland. You do a week in Poland, a week in Israel. So I'd done that on a program. So I saw Poland. Um, I have been, so let's see, where have I been to? America, Canada, Mexico, um, let's see, the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica, a couple other Caribbean islands that I'm not remembering. Those, by the way, were when I was younger. I was like a teenager. Those were with my family. So that wasn't solo traveling. It was traveling. It was wonderful, but it was not, it was, there's a big difference between what I've done as I've been an adult versus what I did when I was younger. Um, I've been to, let's see, a lot of the Nordic countries, so Finland, Sweden, um, Estonia, Denmark. I was in Germany for one day, in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt before October 7th, which we haven't even gone into that. We'll talk about that more later. Um, wow, I'm totally blanking.
You've been to a lot of
Ladies,
places.
Turkey. I've been to a lot of places, but I've also seen very little. I think the world is so incredibly vast, and for me, it's so not like a check, check, check. It's so much more of like, what an incredible privilege it is that been able to see these places in my lifetime, and also to have this weird awareness of like it's so small, it's so finite. These places are so everywhere is constantly changing. Like there's this great quote, no man or woman ever steps in the same river twice because the river's not the same, and nor is he. Right? And it's the same thing with travel. So every place that you go, everything you do in life. If I were to go back to Pittsburgh right now or Orlando, it's not the same. It's just not the same. You can say, oh, that's where I went to school. The kids in that school aren't the same. The faculty aren't the same. And if they are the same, you're not meeting the same person because years have passed. So while I have been and I can recognize I've been to quite a few countries, the I'll call it the shadow part of me is like, oh my God, yeah, but look, this person's been to that many places and that person's been to that many places. And I know that that is 100% my, we'll call it my Yetzer Hara, because I know that, and we all need the Yetzer Hara, but it's also
Sorry,
not.
Nadav, can you just explain a little bit Shadow and Yetzer Hara for people who may not be
Yes.
familiar with those?
Yetzer Hara. I don't know if I'm the best person to explain Yetzer Hara.
No,
Yetzer Hara,
as you
Yetzer
understand it, yeah.
So I'll explain it kind of like this with shadow and Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov is within all of us, we have darkness and light to simplify it. We all have tendencies that are better and that are worse. Something, for example, it could be a Yetzer Hara could be as small as, there's a really cute little spoon at this restaurant. I really love it. It's a Michelin restaurant. They're not going to miss if I steal the spoon, and I steal the spoon, and I don't feel good about it, but I stole the spoon, right? The Yetzer Tov could be like, there's a person walking down the street, and they've fallen over, nobody's stopping to help them, and they're bleeding. I'm going to stop and help that person. I don't know if that's the best example. It's the first things that popped in my mind, but pretty much the idea is that within all of us, we have darkness and we have light. And our darkness and light we each have a choice every day and throughout our lifetimes to decide which way are we going to go. And it's important to have both. All of us were in life, it's full of duality. We're full of balances. In the East, they would say the yin yang. In Judaism, Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. It's this balance. We all have these better tendencies, these worse tendencies. So when I talk about the Yetzer Hara, I'm aware, as I said, what I said about the fact that travel, for example, I'm like, I look at somebody else, I'm like, oh my God, that person's been to so many places. It's a darker part of me. It doesn't mean it's bad, by the way. It means that it's something that needs more attention, needs more of my love. Why? Because I'm comparing myself to something. And we all do that at some point in our life. And there's something good to that because when you compare in a strategic way, it's like, okay, why am I jealous of something? Because that's where I want to be. It's your emotion showing you where you want to be, right? Your anger shows you where your boundaries are, things like that. So when I'm seeing somebody else, I'm like, oh my God, I haven't been to that many places. That person's been to a lot of places. It's actually me saying, okay, I'm aware that a thought is telling me that I haven't traveled so much and that somehow I'm lesser, this is all, the craziness that we tell ourselves. But I'm also reminding myself with my Yetzer Hatov that you're wonderful. The fact that you've traveled at all, that you went to university, got a double degree in Israel, that you graduated high school, that all these big things that I didn't think I was going to be able to do, you're winning the game. Why? Because it's not a game, and you're winning it because you're doing the things that you were told you weren't going to be able to do, and your only competition is yourself. And the best way to kill something beautiful is to compare it to something else. And yet we also compare ourselves, right? And so it's finding that balance. Like I said, the yin yang, the darkness and the light, we all have it within it. You can't be pure light and you can't be pure darkness. You need to have both, right? And the darker the night, the brighter the stars, things like that. And you can't have the stars without the night sky. And so we need to find balance in our lives constantly. So um, that was kind of the point with the Yetzer Hara. I think that was a pretty decent explanation of what it is. Um,
No, that was wonderful. I forget what had asked you before, but now a question is
where I
coming.
traveled to, the countries or something.
Yeah, but now my question,
Yes,
before my
let's go.
brain just like my question is really like, so there's that saying, right? Wherever you go, there you are, right? Sometimes we make moves and changes because we want to lose ourselves. We want to run away from ourselves. It's an escape. It's a distraction. You are, to my understanding, unusually self-aware for your relatively young age, right? Having worked with other young adults, just in my coaching, like one of the issues with any age actually is how self-aware are you? And I'm just wondering, you know, so some people will do big travels like you've described to find themselves or to learn more about themselves, and you already started from this baseline of a lot of self-awareness,
Right.
to my understanding, partly influenced by the struggles that you did go through with your diagnoses and the whole, story as a child and growing up because you were forced to look in that mirror every day, whether it was someone telling you there's something wrong and we have to fix it, or that you shouldn't be this way and that, work within this box. And so that question of who am I has been part of your life for so long, whereas I think for many of us, we don't necessarily ask that question, or if that question comes up, it's buried under like, don't look there and look outside. What are other people doing? Which is why social media can be so insidious, especially for
Sure.
younger people, in my humble opinion. And so I'm just wondering, to the travel point,
Yeah.
you obviously had these amazing skills, techniques, resources. You came up with the description of what Tourette is and you translated it into every language for where you'd be going, like such forethought, right? Like such foresight of what might come up. And it's not like I would imagine that's not exactly in every traveler's guidebook, right? Like be sure to translate any condition you may have or whatever. But so I'm just wondering let's do your most recent travel and then if you want work backwards. But like you just recently were in Vietnam and India, right? Did I
Yes.
miss a country?
No. India, by the way, is just it's hard to say it's a country. It's much more like saying the EU is a country because Slovakia and France are
Yeah,
both countries. So India, like Kerala and Gujarat are Hindu, but it's like just as similar as Slovakia and France are both Christian. One's
got
Catholic.
it. So,
Yeah.
but within those geographical regions that you were most recently in, where you're at, like, can you share if you think it'll be helpful, like what you think, where you think you did have growth, where you did learn something, whether it was about yourself or about others, and then um if you want to bring in like how people responded to you as a particular, unusually large,
Yeah.
tall person, formidable physical presence. Obviously, you don't look the same as a lot of the people with your features, and then also having whatever happened with Tourette's. Like, I'm just so curious if you can talk about your most recent.
I'm gonna start answering, and I want you to reframe me because there's a lot of really good questions, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to answer them all, and I'm totally gonna get lost. So I want you to remind me them a lot
No,
later.
you should have a piece of paper and a pen like I do, and I'm just like making little notes here.
Okay, next time I'll do that. Next time I'll prepare for that.
I'll get a transcript from this one. We'll figure it out for the next conversation.
The first question that you actually didn't ask, it wasn't a question, but it was something I wanted to comment on, is you had said a lot of people travel to find themselves. And certainly in Israel, as I had previously mentioned, it's a rite of passage pretty much when you finish the army to go travel. And it's really interesting because I don't think, for me, I've never traveled to find myself. And I don't think we ever actually find ourselves. And I think that kind of verbiage is a bit problematic because it's almost a saying if you go somewhere or do something, you find something. When it's not true. Because, like you said, Howard Zinn, wherever you go, there you are. And when I've traveled and I would even venture to say journeyed, because it's much more of a journey, it's not, obviously it's like I'd like to go see some things, I'd like to go experience some of these things, but it's much more of how can I throw myself, because I'm not going to walk, how can I throw myself out of the comfort zone, and how is that going to develop me as a person in a way that I'm also experiencing something that I want to see. Potential Asian food, oh my God, amazing. I saw Jewish communities that were so different from what I knew growing up in the American Jewish and Israeli Jewish communities, which are even in those American and Jewish and Israeli Jewish, there's so much diversity, right?
Right.
But that's the first thing. It's like, even what does it mean to find oneself? I'm also not sure we ever do. I think we're constantly going through stages of development. I think that when I was 5 years ago, what I wanted is so different from what I want now. And I think when we ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or if you ask a young adult, go study something to go figure out what you want to be. You have three children, they're coming of age. It's like, Mom, I want to go study such and such. It doesn't matter. Go study what's interesting to you that has an application, and you can change your mind later on. You know, um, and as a mother, and or quote unquote, after you've, for some people in their in their 60s or 70s or 50s, whenever it is that your children have grown up and have left the house, then it's the question of I've found the partner. I've raised the children. They're all good. They're all great. Who am I? Because for the past 20, 30 years, I've been raising children. I don't know like, so that's the big thing, is that, do we ever find ourselves? That's a whole nother conversation. So when I travel and journey, it's much more getting out of the comfort zone, want to experience something amazing, and not holding myself back, and not letting any of the sordid stories that I've told myself hold myself back. And it used to be when I was younger, proving wrong the people who doubted me and told me, you're not going to graduate high school, you're not going to go to university, you should drop out of school, all these horrible things that I haven't even touched on yet, and saying, you shouldn't travel, you have Tourette, and you have all of these other countless problems that people will literally list. I've had literally 4 months ago, before my trip, I went to a psychiatrist and they told me, you are an invalid. You should consider quitting your job. These are literally what he said, and get what's it called? National insurance. It was insane. And I remember, like, this is insane. like I'm doing fine. I'm saying I'm struggling. That I need what's it called? I need support because I'm going on a trip and I want you to write me a letter. I forgot even what I was asking for, but it was something very simple. And it was just crazy. Um, the terminology. So that for me is the impetus, I would say, for me traveling in the first place. And besides wanting to see a new culture, a new place, and experience this amazing world that we're all a part of, because it's small and it's big. It's both
Mm.
duality. Anyways, now to answer your question, what are some of the things that I've experienced in India and Vietnam? Could you just replay some of those questions again, just so I have it fresh in my mind?
You think I
Um,
remember? I mean,
okay,
I'm like, no, I'm
okay,
kidding. It's really just in terms of your growth or what you learned either about yourself or about the world or how it's changed how you feel. I mean, I'll throw it in there because we haven't even gotten there, but let's weave it in, which is I ask people who come on, this conversation with me is what is your definition of a truly great life? Right? And you've kind of touched on this throughout your, conversation to this point of what is meaningful for you in a lot of ways and what you're curious about and your openness and your experience and your journeying. So I guess, if you can just share from this last chapter of travel and journeying, what you got out of it. Um, and then, I do want to know how you kind of define a truly great life, but we can either weave that in or we can talk about it
I'll
after.
start and you guide me. I'm just gonna give you a great flow of like a river of thoughts, and you're like, okay, cool, Nadav. I want you to kind of go this way, this way. We're gonna do it together. So when I went on this recent trip, unlike this trip to Central Asia, and also I hadn't mentioned when I went to Georgia with my girlfriend, that was also I'd gone by myself, but I met her, as in I was not solo. This trip, I went solo. I went into the gauntlet, we'll say. I got on a plane, having not traveled in over a year. Yeah, and in a year. Um, and I flew into Mumbai. And I got off the plane and I had a taxi booked. And I was like, what the fuck did I just do? The amount of people, we talk about populated places in the world. Yeah, the first thing that hit me is, yeah, this is the most populated place in the world. The amount of people that are everywhere. Talk about stimulation. Um, it was insane. And so I remember getting to my hostel, which, by the way, what I've never stayed in a hostel before. A hostel, by the way, is a place that you sleep with other people in the same room, strangers. You never met them before. You have all your stuff, all your passports, all your money, and you lock it up and you just hope it's gonna go well, right? This is complete outside the comfort zone. By the way, if viewer, if listener, you should journal. I journal a lot. It's really good. If I look at my journal, I was like, what the fuck was happening? What was I doing? I'm so far out of my comfort zone. I don't know where my bounds are anymore. I'm like, what am I doing? And when I got off the taxi, I got there at 4 a.m. This was a neighborhood that was not, as we would define, a good neighborhood.
Mm,
People walking the streets half clothed. There were some prostitutes, smells, sewage, stuff that I had not even expected to experience. So here I am with a big backpack and a small backpack, and the door's locked. And I'm like, okay, okay. Eventually, after 20 minutes, I'm banging on the door. I'm like, I'm not getting stuck here. People are looking at me. I got in. The room's not ready. So I ended up sleeping outside, getting bit by mosquitoes. I was like, okay, at least I'm inside a wall. I'm not going to be attacked. I managed to doze off for about 30 minutes. I eventually checked in to the hostel, and that was my first introduction to Mumbai. And through pretty much, I have to preface this. When I went to India, the whole impetus for me going there was because a friend of mine from university at Bar Ilan was getting married in the south, and I wanted to go to his wedding. And what I kind of did was took it as a, it was kind of like that was the node of going outside the comfort zone. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go do that. And I was like, hold on, Nadav, how can I make you more uncomfortable to grow more? So I'm like, okay, we're gonna make a trip out of this. We're gonna make a journey out of this. So I decided to make something that could have been 1 week into 3 months. Um, but anyways, back to the point of, so the biggest things in India that I noticed for myself is people, and I journaled about this as well. And I'll publish this later on. People don't understand what Tourette syndrome is, which is really ironic because I ended up speaking with this Indian woman who did know what it was, and she said there's a lot of national education about what it is, which was really interesting. I'll give you an example just to fast forward in the trip a bit because this is about 5, 6 weeks into the trip. I was by myself in Udaipur, Rajasthan, and this day was one of the most difficult ones on my trip. This is after my
Mm.
friend's wedding had happened, and I was by myself. And I was walking around the city, and I kid you not, every place I went, be it a restaurant, a cafe, walking down the street, at one point or another, somebody was looking at me. And stares are something that's really difficult to deal with because sometimes you're like, okay, maybe you're the foreigner, you're the tall guy, you have the hair, and stares are something I'm somewhat used to. And I say used to because it's still uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, I can understand that. When you see people, and this was triggering for me because as a kid, people used to make fun of me in many ways and bully me in many ways. One of those ways was imitating my tics because I couldn't control it. They'd make fun of it. It's hilarious for them. It's awful for you. It's kind of like if you have a big mole on your face and people are drawing moles on their face, right? You don't like it, something you're struggling with, somebody's making fun of that. This was the first time in a big situation where I would be walking down the street and there'd be like 10 people staring at me and with their friends, like literally imitating my twitches,
Wow.
like word by word. I'd be walking down, ignoring them, and they'd follow me. And they would continue, and you ignore them, and you don't want to give them attention. And then sometimes it would get to be too much where I'd go into a restaurant, and it doesn't. It's hard to really imagine, but imagine a small restaurant where there's people of all ages, and the second you walk in, everybody's looking at you. And after about 2 minutes of sitting down, I'm starting to twitch more because, just it's hot as well. And people are looking at me. So I'm a bit uncomfortable. So I'm twitching a bit. At least half the people in the restaurant, not just children you can excuse because children aren't necessarily as knowing of what it is, but adults start imitating your tics. And it's incredibly uncomfortable. And the staff go along with it as well.
Oh my
And it's
gosh.
where can I find a latibule? Where can I find a sanctuary for myself? It's like everywhere I'm going, I'm getting hammered with being made fun of. And what was interesting, and I can say this in hindsight, is it allowed me to face a lot of my own shadow of why am I so uncomfortable with this? And I realized it was because I'd been bullied so much. It was something that I had learned to bully myself about of like, oh, it's uncomfortable, it's not okay, it's bad. And it's besides the physical discomfort of trying to eat and like you're eating with the fork and then you throw the fork across the room. And
Hmm.
you do that on purpose. And it doesn't feel like you. But obviously, if you explain to somebody, it's like, I just saw you throw a fork. You're gonna tell me that wasn't you. So it's a cognitive exercise to even understand that, let alone to somebody who doesn't speak the language. So I don't try to explain it, but that day, which felt like a long time, but it was any time I had stopped, besides when I was in the bathroom by myself, somebody was making fun of me. And there were days like that were just grueling. And there was nothing fun about it. I remember at the end of the day, getting back to this tiny little guest house, which was it was really nice because I was by myself. I wasn't in a hostel.
Hmm.
And I called my parents. I said, and I explained to them what happened, and they just were able to listen. And that's all I needed at that point was just someone to listen because they could understand. They've known me my whole life. They're not me. They have no idea how difficult it is to have Tourette. But out of everybody that could have some fabrication of an idea, they're probably closest to it. And that day wasn't isolated. It did happen at other points throughout the trip, but that was definitely the worst one. In terms of growth, it taught me a lot about how we as people make assumptions and how we as people make fun of things that we don't understand. And it applies to everything in life. It really does. And there's few things that apply to everything in life. There really are. And I'm sure there's a logical argument for even why this might not apply to everything. But when we this is going back to what we were talking about, I think earlier in the podcast about when you see somebody with Tourette or if you see somebody making a disruption, how do you cope with that? What do you do? And what I realized is having been on the receiving end of so many assumptions throughout my life, and Tourette is just it doesn't even seem like that big of a deal. It could even be an assumption about you're the tall guy in the room, at a party, you're a threat kind of thing. It could be any kind of
Mm.
assumption. Having been on the receiving end of so many assumptions, I've learned how incredibly often they're not true and inaccurate. And on the one hand, from a survival mechanism, we need to have an idea of okay, you see, you're a woman, you're by yourself at night, there's a guy walking down this alley. You're going to make some assumptions, right? It could also be that that guy is just walking home. We have no idea, right? So there is a place for assumptions. But in terms of this situation for myself and through various situations that I had in India, it's learning how often we have to be aware of our assumptions. And more than that, our perceptions. Because our perceptions are what make our reality. You know, we talk about the grass being green. Well, we think the grass is green, or we talk, oh, the grass is greener on the other side. Well, is the grass green in the first place? Because we're able to see that grass is green through our trichromatic vision as humans. To a dog, grass is not green. And then if you want to go into the metaphysics of it, the astrophysics of it, there are other consciousnesses that may or may not exist that may not even like look at grass in the same way. And if you really want to go into what is the substance of a piece of grass, we don't actually know what color it is because we can only perceive it through certain things that we see as verdant green sensory. I mean, there's a whole tangent you could go on about it, but it's just being aware for myself of assumptions and perceptions and constantly questioning them, which can make you crazy, but it does build character, which is the other thing that I've learned on this trip is having been in situations where, quote unquote, there's no one who's coming to save you. When you
Mm.
are in the humidity of Kerala, which is the southern southwest tip of India, which makes a Florida summer look like winter.
Oh no.
And as I said earlier, the listener, if you're following my ramblings here, me, heat, humidity does not go well together. So I'm twitching. I'm at a train station. Nobody speaks English. I'm doing my gesticulations trying to say I need a train to get to Panaji, Goa. What are we doing here? That that you're able to do things you never thought you were able to do. And this is the cliche that is so true. You have no idea how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. And
Mm.
it applies to every single human being. It's easier said than done. And when you're in those doleful, depressive moments of your life, when they're it's like nobody understands what I'm going through right now. I don't know what I'm doing. And we have those moments, all of us, be it whether you're single, in a marriage, in a long-term relationship, at any point in your life, loneliness is something that I think it's a fundamental part of the human experience. And when you're alone, it doesn't necessarily mean you're lonely. And what I've learned is that when I was alone, I actually was like, wow, this is pretty awesome. And you get to kind of look at yourself as a friend of like, okay, it was solitude, and solitude is not the same as loneliness. And I don't know if it's something that it was something that I didn't learn, but it was something that I grew in that sense because I realized. And it's not like, oh, I've come to this epiphany or this enlightenment, because you still go back to like, you don't want to be alone, or you feel lonely. And the solitude and loneliness, it's like a duality in life, right? It goes back and forth. But I did grow in that sense of realizing that not only am I capable of doing everything that I was told I couldn't do, and that I can build belief and actually becoming grateful for the people who doubted me in my childhood and in my adolescence, that I can actually say, I booked trains in a country where nobody spoke the language. Um, the you get on the train, people are sitting in your seat and they're not getting out of your seat, and then you end up sitting on a seat for 10 hours with strangers who are smelly, eating food and defecating a couple, meters away from you in their own bathroom. I mean, just crazy, crazy shit. Um, but then that you start being friendly with those people, and then they offer you their food, and you start talking with them, and they invite you to their house, and that house happens to be where you're getting off. And then you have these amazing experiences you couldn't have had if you were fearful, or if you were so into your own, sense of, oh my God, these crazy Indians. Because what is an Indian, right? What is an American? Like, these are, again, constructs that we've made. There's so many different people. I mean, look at America right now, right? What is an American? Like, there's somebody in the same city. There's like thousands and hundreds of thousands of different people, right? So it's understanding that in terms of a growth idea, that humans are humans, and that there, like I've said in previous points of this podcast, there is humans who have chosen darkness in this life. Hamas, people have chosen darkness, and they need to be dealt with in a certain way. There are some people who have gone so far into the darkness, as it was Khalid ibn Walid. He was a Umayyad conqueror. He had said, "Be wary, my reader." So this is not a direct quote, because you will meet people in your life who worship death as much as you worship life. And there are people like that in the world. And there's people like that in India. I had an experience where there was a guy who had a little tuk-tuk, and he had a big Palestinian flag, and he wanted to hurt me. And I knew he wanted to hurt me. And I had to deal with that in a specific situation. But those are other stories for other times. That was how did I grow in this journey? it was kind of what I said, realizing that I'm able to do more than what I previously thought I was able to do, learning to become your best friend. And it's a process. It's not in any way that I've quote unquote arrived there. It's always a journey of becoming, and it's reminding yourself that the gift of being whoever you are, the listener, whoever you are. I'll say my name, Nadav Zachary Weil, but whoever you are, that there's never going to be another human conscious awareness person who's ever going to be able to experience the privilege of what it's like to be you. And by the way, that privilege includes all the shit that you go through, all the shit that you've been through in your life, and all the wonderful, jubilant joys that only you will ever be able to experience. And somebody will say, oh, yes, well, this is what the human experience will, these are the stages of development of man. Yeah, but you're experiencing that for the first time. It's only you. It doesn't matter that tens of thousands of people go to India, or that all these Israelis have gone to India, and that you're seeing stuff that people are like, oh, yeah, in Hebrew, and or I already did that, I already saw that, because you're seeing it, you're experiencing it. This great quote, another one: climb mountains so that you can see the world and not so the world can see you. And that's what I've started to understand on this trip. Because again, it's a journey. It's not like I've understood it. Is that there's so much to see in the world. Don't let anything hold you back, especially not yourself. That's the biggest thing.
I think we are at a good place to wrap this first, hopefully, first of many
Yeah.
conversations. Um,
Comment below, guys, if you like this. I
Sorry, say it again.
was gonna say comment below, engage. Let
Yeah,
us know.
comment in the. So, Nadav, can you kind of in just a few sentences, how do you define truly great life?
I'm gonna answer this in a kind of a Jewish way. The first question is, how would you define a truly great life? It's something that you have to decide for yourself. So how do I, Nadav, define it? You should only take from it what is beneficial for you as an I experiencing whoever you are. Um, for me, a truly great life is um, having exemplary family and friends in my life, people who love me and who I love them, and who I can understand on a deep level. And Bezrat Hashem, finding myself in Eshet Chayil and being able to journey through my life with her at my side, and being able to experience the the stages of development that we're all going to go through. What was it like to be a little boy? What was it like to be a young boy, a teenage boy, now a young man? What's it? I'll probably be married in the next 5 years. So what's it like to be single right now and have no idea what I'm doing? And I don't like my job. How am I going to figure it out? Where am I going to go next? And as difficult as that is, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore. That's part of a great life. If everything was good all the time, it wouldn't be worthwhile. It's like if you eat really good mac and cheese every day, you're going to feel sick, right? Mac and cheese is really good, but if you eat it all the time, it's not going to be good. You're not going to like it anymore. It's not going to make you feel good. And it's finding pleasure in French. It's called mes petits plaisirs, in the little pleasures. It's when you're on a day where maybe your children are really bothering you and you are just exhausted and you're like, I haven't slept well, or you are all by yourself and you feel very lonely and you just want somebody to give you a hug. It could be something like making up a cup of coffee or buying a cup of coffee, sitting in a cafe and looking at the steam as it rises, and just the beauty of how that interacts with the environment around it. It could be, for me, opening up a can of sardines at work, and I'm like, oh, I've had a tough day, and I'll open up the can of sardines, and it's like, look how perfectly they're aligned. That's really cool. How cool is that? It could be, it's those little things. And so, what's a truly great life? It's not only the little things. It's not only who you're doing it with. Like I said, family and friends and people who are I'll say are your people, and your people are different because you have different people for different things. But at the end of the day, it's your kehillah, it's your community. And truly, what's wonderful is when you meet friends and those friends introduce you to other friends, and then you're all kind of friends together. We're living in a weird time. By the way, all times are weird, but we're living in a weird time because we're part of time where we're not living in these small communities. I can look at myself. I have friends in all sorts of different places, and it's really tough because it's like, where is home? And I don't really have home. Home is it's the cliche home where is where the heart is. Well, home is kind of where I am. It's where I'm going to make it for myself. And like I said, when I do find my wife one day, we'll make a home. But it's also when you find kindred souls. You know, home is it can be as something as small as going and having a cup of coffee with a friend and having somebody to talk to. And so, what is a truly great life? It's all those things that I mentioned, and it's understanding that you as an I, someone who's aware of what it's like to be, let's say Nadav Zachary Weil or whoever you are, Ilana Ivan, are going through a incredible, inexplicable, um, ineffable experience that is you and something that only you will ever experience. And to understand that to feel the greatest pleasures is to feel the greatest sufferings, and that you have to give space to everything. To everything, there's a turn. And the greatness of it is to be aware and to enjoy the journey and the destination and the experience of it all. And that this answer that I'm giving right now might be very different later on, right? Because I'll be a different person. So it's also being able to ride that wave. So all those different answers, I guess that's the one kind of answer of a truly great life. And my last thing, the viewer is really sitting with yourself, breathing in, and even realizing with the breath, it shows how provided you are. You're able to breathe air, like you're able to experience it. And sometimes it's like, oh God, I'm not having a good day. This Nadav guy, like he's too positive. And I'm like, listen, viewer, listener, I'm not always like this. I'm on a podcast right now. I have my doleful doubts. I have my down days. So your truly great life is really something you're going to figure out for yourself. And it can be difficult, but it's also lovely when you start to be able to bounce what is a truly great life off of other ideas. And my last thing I'll leave you with, I start not off of other ideas, off of other people. The last thing I'll leave you with is just like Ilana has created a podcast and she can bring on different people and ask them what a truly great life is. I wonder, I speculate, I have no idea. I could be completely off. But maybe part of her truly great life is hearing what other people's definitions of truly great are.
That was so beautiful. I love that. I love everything that you said. And that was very insightful and sweet because I do get great pleasure out of meeting and connecting with people as you and I have talked about before. And really just yeah, I mean, you said it extremely eloquently, but I so appreciate you coming on, Nadav. I know we have a lot more that we can talk about. I feel like this is a good place to pin the other
Definitely.
topics for now. So appreciate you. Words of wisdom throughout. And please let the viewer slash listener know how they can get in touch with you. And I'll put it in the description also.
It's funny because I say like I'm a young professional. Guys, I'm just figuring this out like everybody else is. If you want to send me a message to collaborate, if you maybe have an opportunity or you'd like to discuss something, you have a question, you just want to say, hello, my name is such and such. Best way to reach me is email nadavzwile@gmail.com. We'll type that below, I'm sure, so that you can make sure there's no spelling mistakes. If you want to check out my Instagram, like I said actually previously in the podcast, a tall, twitchy traveler. I have a private one which I'm not going to put on. That's for my friends and stuff. But if we start emailing it and I decide it's okay, you can add that as well. So email is probably the best way to reach me. My LinkedIn I'll also put down below. And just be yourself. If you're like, should I send them an email? Should I not? Just say hello and we'll have a conversation. We'll see where it goes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nadav, and I look forward to having more conversations.
Likewise. Thank you for having me, Alana.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, was that not amazing? Isn't Nadav incredible? I am a huge fan, as you could probably tell if you made it to the end of the conversation. Thank you for sticking with us. I hope you got something very powerful out of it. There is a lot to be gained, I think, from hearing Nadav's story and his approach. Please, please, please share this episode with anybody that you know who either can identify with Nadav or has someone in their life who could benefit from hearing his story. And thanks again for coming on. Again, if you or someone you know has a message or a story that you feel should be heard on a larger scale, want to come on the show, talk about what you've gone through, changes you've made, challenges you've overcome or are overcoming, and are still getting up every day and pursuing your version of a truly great life, I do want to hear from you. Let's talk. So reach out to me at trulygreatlife.com. Thanks again, guys, and see you on the next one.